For 5 years, I held my tongue. That might be the most difficult thing I've ever done, and I've buried a husband, survived 2 recessions, and learned how to use a smartphone. But staying quiet while watching my grandson Arthur give his heart to a woman who treated it like a stepping stone, that was a trial of a different order. Her name was Jessica Vance, and she was, by all accounts, a vision. She had hair the color of summer wheat that fell in waves she insisted were natural, and eyes so blue they seemed to borrow from the sky on its clearest day. When she smiled, which was often and with strategic precision, she could charm a bird from a tree. My son Stephen, Art's father, was certainly charmed. He saw her as the perfect match for his boy, ambitious, beautiful, and socially adept. I saw something else. I saw the flash of calculation in those blue eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them unless a camera was pointed her way. I am not a cynical woman by nature. My late husband, Robert, always said I saw the best in people long after they'd given up on seeing it in themselves. But with Jessica, the best was a carefully constructed facade. I saw it in the small things, the quiet moments she thought no one was watching. I remember one Christmas, about 2 years into their relationship. Arthur had spent weeks, actual weeks, handcrafting a beautiful wooden jewelry box for her. He'd learned woodworking from his grandfather, my Robert, and every dovetail joint, every smoothed edge was a testament to his love and patience. He was so proud to give it to her, his face glowing with anticipation. Jessica unwrapped it, and for a fleeting second her mask slipped. I saw the flicker of disappointment. "Oh, Art," she'd said, her voice a little too bright. "You made this, it's so rustic." She kissed his cheek, a quick, dismissive peck, and set the box aside, turning her attention to the small, brand-name box from my son Stephen, which contained a pair of designer earrings. The handcrafted box was relegated to a dusty corner of her closet, a fact I learned from Arthur himself months later, his voice tinged with a hurt he was trying to hide. Another time, for their 3rd anniversary, Arthur booked a weekend trip to a quiet cabin in the mountains. He envisioned long hikes, cozy fires, and uninterrupted time together. He'd packed a picnic basket and even brought his guitar to play her the songs she loved. He told me the story later, a little bit of the light gone from his eyes. Jessica had spent most of the first day complaining about the lack of cell service. She'd called the cabin quaint, with the same tone one might use for infested. She spent the second day scrolling through photos on her phone of her friends who were vacationing in Cabo, making pointed remarks about the glamour of it all. They came home a day early. Arthur tried to laugh it off, saying, "I guess she's just more of a city girl." But I heard the real story in the silence that followed. He had offered her his world, a world of simple, genuine connection, and she had wrinkled her nose at it. My son Stephen saw none of this. He saw a go-getter, a woman who pushed Arthur to be more successful. To Stephen, success was a linear path paved with promotions, status symbols, and a perfectly manicured lawn. He loved his son, of course, but he'd forgotten that Robert and I had built our lives on something far stronger than a stock portfolio. We built it on shared laughter over burned toast, on hands held in sterile hospital waiting rooms, on the quiet understanding that passed between us in a crowded room. We had a wealth that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. Jessica, it seemed, only dealt in the currency of appearances. She encouraged Arthur to buy a car he couldn't afford, to pursue a promotion in a department he hated, and to network with people he found insufferably shallow. And Arthur, bless his loving, loyal heart, tried his best to become the man he thought she wanted, all the while dimming the bright, authentic light of the man he already was. I watched and I worried, my heart aching for the inevitable day when the price of her love would become too high for him to pay. I just never imagined I'd be the one handing him the currency for that final, devastating transaction. The week before the proposal was a flurry of secret whispers and nervous energy. Arthur came to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, the autumn sun casting long shadows across my living room. He sat on the edge of my floral armchair, the one Robert always used to sit in, and he couldn't stop fidgeting. He ran his hands through his hair, tapped his foot on the hardwood floor, and took 3 sips of water before he finally managed to get the words out. "Grandma," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm going to ask Jessica to marry me." I felt a complex cocktail of emotions swirl within me. There was a surge of love for this wonderful young man, my grandson, who wore his heart so openly on his sleeve, but beneath it a cold dread pooled in my stomach. I managed a smile. "Oh, Arthur, that's big news." "I want to do it right," he continued, gaining momentum. "I've planned a special dinner this Saturday. I've invited you and Dad, and Jessica's parents are driving in. I want it to be a celebration, a real family affair." My son Stephen was, of course, ecstatic. When Arthur told him, Stephen clapped him on the back and immediately started talking about venues and guest lists, already seeing the perfect, socially advantageous wedding in his mind's eye. He saw the union of two promising young people, a merger of potential. I saw my gentle, kind-hearted boy about to chain himself to a beautifully polished anchor. "There's one more thing," Arthur said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were full of hope, a brilliant, fragile light I was desperate to protect. "I was hoping, I know how much it means to you and to Grandpa." He took a deep breath. "I was hoping you'd let me give her Grandpa Robert's ring." The air left my lungs. The ring, it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a vessel of memory, a symbol of a 60-year love story. It was a simple, elegant thing. Robert had bought it in 1955 after saving for months from his modest salary as a teacher. It wasn't a massive, showy diamond. It was a modest, clear stone set in a delicate platinum band that was worn smooth with time. The value of the ring was not in its carats, but in its history. It was the ring Robert had slid onto my finger on a rainy April day, his hands trembling slightly. It was the ring I'd twisted nervously while waiting for Arthur's father, Stephen, to be born. It was the ring I'd held up to the light, remembering after I lost Robert. It was a part of my soul. "Art that ring?" I started, my voice catching. "I know, Grandma, I know. That's why I want it. I want our marriage to be like yours and Grandpa's. I want that strength. I want to give Jessica something that means more than money." His words were a spear to my heart. He understood its meaning perfectly. He was trying to offer Jessica the most precious thing our family had, its legacy of love. And how could I deny him that? How could I tell him that I feared he was about to offer a sacred gift to someone who would only weigh it on a jeweler's scale? To refuse would be to admit I had no faith in his choice, to shatter his beautiful, hopeful vision before he even had a chance to see it through. So, with a heavy heart, I did the only thing a grandmother could do. I supported him. I went to the old wooden box where I kept my treasures. As I lifted the lid, the scent of cedar and thyme filled the air. There it was, nestled in faded velvet. The diamond caught the afternoon light, not with a fiery, ostentatious brilliance, but with a quiet, steady glow. It was a star, not a spotlight. I placed the small box in Arthur's hand. His own hands, so much like his grandfather's, closed around it reverently. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "This means everything." "Just make sure she knows what it is, dear," I said softly. "It's not just a ring, it's a story." He nodded, his expression earnest and serious. "I'll tell her, she'll love it, I know she will." I prayed he was right. I prayed that for once I had misjudged Jessica. I prayed that she would see the boy I saw, the legacy I was offering, and understand the profound value of what she was being given. It was a prayer said with little faith, a desperate wish cast into a gathering storm. Saturday arrived cloaked in a deceptive sense of calm. The restaurant Arthur had chosen was tastefully elegant, a place with white tablecloths, hushed lighting, and waiters who moved with silent efficiency. It was expensive, a place meant to impress, and I knew instantly that this choice was more for Jessica's benefit than his own. Arthur would have been just as happy proposing on a park bench with a hot dog in hand. Jessica's parents, the Vances, were pleasant enough in a detached, polished way. They spoke of their daughter's accomplishments and the importance of starting off on the right foot. My son Stephen engaged them eagerly, their conversation a smooth hum of financial talk and mutual acquaintances. I sat beside Arthur, offering him what I hoped was a reassuring smile every time he glanced my way, his nerves palpable. And then there was Jessica. She was radiant. She wore a silk dress the color of a night sky, and her laughter, though a bit too loud, filled our corner of the restaurant. She held court, telling a long, animated story about a recent promotion at her marketing firm. She was the star of the show, and Arthur watched her with an expression of pure adoration. It was like watching a moth gaze at a beautiful, mesmerizing flame. The meal progressed, the appetizers were cleared, the main courses served. Through it all, a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. I watched Jessica's hands. They were perfectly manicured, adorned with delicate, fashionable rings on several fingers. They were hands that expected to be decorated. I looked at my own hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, my only adornment the simple gold band I had worn since Robert's ring was passed to Arthur. My hands had kneaded dough, planted gardens, wiped tears, and held my husband's hand as he took his last breath. They were hands that had worked for a life, not just accessorized one. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, Arthur cleared his throat. A hush fell over the table. He pushed his chair back slightly and reached for his jacket pocket. My breath caught. Stephen was beaming. Mr. and Mrs. Vance were leaning forward with expectant smiles. Arthur's eyes were locked on Jessica. "Jess," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been together for 5 years, and they have been the best 5 years of my life. You make me want to be a better man. You're my best friend, my whole world." He was doing so well. His words were simple, heartfelt, and true. He slid off his chair and knelt on one knee beside her. The classic time-honored gesture. From his pocket he produced the small, velvet-lined box, my box. He opened it. The ring sat there, its quiet light seeming to absorb the dim, ambient glow of the restaurant. It looked small and profound, a whisper of devotion in a room full of noise. "Jessica Vance," he said, his voice trembling but clear, "will you marry me?" The silence that followed was not the joyful, tearful silence of acceptance. It was a sharp, sudden vacuum. It stretched for 1 second, then 2, then 5. Jessica didn't look at Arthur. She stared, unblinking, at the ring. Her perfect smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of faint, almost clinical disbelief. "Art, what is that?" she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was flat, cutting through the expectant atmosphere like a shard of glass. Arthur's smile faltered. It's the ring. It's my grandmother's. It was my grandfather's." She finally looked at him, not with love or surprise, but with something akin to pity. "Are you serious?" she asked, a small, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. She glanced around the table as if to see if everyone else was in on some bizarre joke. Her eyes met mine for a brief, cold moment. "Get up, Arthur," she said, her voice now laced with an unmistakable edge of annoyance. "You're making a scene." He remained on one knee, his face a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. "Jess, I don't understand." "This," she said, waving a dismissive hand at the open box. "This is the proposal here, and with that," she finally picked up the ring, holding it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a curious insect. "The stone is tiny, it looks cheap." The word hung in the air, cheap. It struck me with a physical force. It was an insult to my husband, to our life together, to the very idea of a love that transcends material wealth. I felt a hot flush of anger rise up my neck. Stephen's smile had frozen on his face, a rictus of disbelief. "And this whole public spectacle is just embarrassing," Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength as she warmed to her theme. Did you really think I'd want this? A second-hand ring and a cliché proposal at a family dinner, it's what people do in old movies, Art, it's not us. She dropped the ring back into the box. It landed with a soft, final thud. I'm sorry, she said, though her tone conveyed no sorrow at all. But no, the answer is no. She stood up, smoothed down her silk dress, and gave her parents a look. I think we should go. Arthur was still on his knee, the open box still in his hand, his face utterly ashen. He looked like a statue, a monument to a moment of catastrophic heartbreak. He didn't say a word, he just stared at the spot where she had been sitting. The Vances murmured their awkward apologies, a flurry of so sorries and he'll call yous, and then they were gone, following their daughter out of the restaurant and out of our lives. My son Stephen finally found his voice. I can't believe it, he stammered, looking from the empty chair to his devastated son. But I could believe it all too well. This was the moment I had been dreading for 5 years. The facade had not just cracked, it had been sledgehammered into 1,000 pieces, revealing the cold, transactional core beneath. Arthur slowly, mechanically closed the lid of the box. He stood up, his movements stiff and robotic. He didn't look at me or his father. He just stood there holding the small box that now felt like it weighed 100 pounds, engulfed in a silence more humiliating than any shouted insult could ever be. The car ride home was a study in silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of it filled the space between us. Stephen drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were WH. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Arthur, who sat in the back, staring out the window at the blurred city lights. Arthur hadn't spoken a single word since Jessica had walked away. He just held the small, velvet box in his lap, his thumb tracing its edges over and over again. I sat in the passenger seat, my own heart a leaden weight in my chest. My anger had cooled into a deep, profound ache. It was one thing to be proven right. It was another to watch my prophecy of doom unfold at the expense of my grandson's happiness. Every so often, Stephen would open his mouth as if to say something, then close it again, defeated. What could be said? I'm sorry felt insultingly inadequate. She wasn't worth it felt premature and dismissive of the 5 years Arthur had invested. So we drove on, each of us trapped in our own bubble of shock and sorrow. When we arrived back at my son's house, where Arthur was still living to save money for a future with Jessica, I realized with a fresh pang of bitterness, he went straight to his room without a word. He didn't say good night. He simply vanished down the hallway, and we heard his door click shut with an air of finality. I'm going to make some tea, I said to Stephen, needing something, anything to do with my hands. Stephen sank onto the sofa, running his hands over his face. I just don't understand, Mom, he said, his voice muffled. She always seemed so happy with him. I thought she loved him. She loved the idea of him, Stephen, I said, my voice gentle but firm as I filled the kettle in the kitchen. She loved his potential. She loved what he could provide for the life she pictured for herself, but I don't think she ever truly saw the man himself. I encouraged this, he said, his voice thick with guilt. I told him she was a catch. I told him he was lucky. You wanted him to be happy, I said, setting 2 mugs on the counter. We all did. We sat and drank our tea in the quiet living room, the sound of the clock on the mantel ticking away the seconds, each one feeling like an eternity. We could hear nothing from Arthur's room. No music, no television, no pacing, just a heavy, unnerving silence. That silence was more worrying than shouting or sobbing would have been. It was the sound of a spirit in retreat, of a heart pulling up its drawbridge. The next day, a Sunday, was worse. Arthur didn't emerge from his room. When Stephen knocked on the door in the late morning, there was a long pause before a muffled, "I'm fine, just tired," came from within. He didn't come out for breakfast or lunch. The house felt like a mausoleum haunted by the ghost of a future that had died the night before. I spent the day puttering in my garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance, yanking them from the soil as if they were the architects of my grandson's pain. With every weed, I thought of Jessica's calculated cruelty. Embarrassing, cheap. The words echoed in my mind. She hadn't just rejected a proposal, she had staged a public execution of Arthur's self-esteem. She had taken his earnest, loving heart and held it up for ridicule. That evening, I couldn't bear it any longer. I packed up a small tray with a bowl of my homemade chicken noodle soup, the ultimate comfort food, the cure-all for every childhood ailment, and a glass of milk. I walked down the hall and knocked softly on his door. "Arthur, it's Grandma, can I come in?" Silence. I waited, my hand still poised to knock again. Just as I was about to turn away, I heard the lock click. The door opened a few inches. The face that peered out at me was a stranger's. It was my Arthur, but the light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow emptiness. His face was pale and drawn, his hair uncombed. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He saw the tray in my hands and something flickered in his expression, not gratitude but a weary resignation. He opened the door wider and stepped aside to let me in. His room was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the world. Clothes were strewn on the floor and the small velvet box sat on his bedside table, stark and accusing. He had taken the ring out and placed it beside the box where it lay like a fallen star, its quiet light extinguished by the gloom. He sat on the edge of his bed and didn't speak. I placed the tray on his desk. I didn't push him to eat. I simply sat down in the chair by his window, a silent companion in his self-imposed darkness. For a long time, the only sound was the quiet hum of the house around us. I knew this was not the time for platitudes or for anger. This was a time for quiet presence. It was a time for simply being there, for letting him know that even if his world had collapsed, he was not alone in the rubble. I would sit in this darkness with him for as long as it took. We sat in that dim room for nearly an hour. The soup grew cold. The silence stretched, but it was no longer the empty, suffocating silence of the night before. It was a shared silence, a space I was holding for him. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy from disuse. "She called me," he said, staring at the ring on his nightstand. "Just before you came in, she sent a text first. We need to talk." I waited, keeping my expression neutral. "I didn't answer," he continued. "Then she called, I let it go to voicemail." He let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. The voicemail was something, no apology, not really, just frustration. She said I overreacted, that I embarrassed her by just sitting there and not saying anything, said I made things awkward for her parents. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it sent a fresh wave of protective anger through me, but I kept it off my face. This wasn't about my anger, it was about his pain. "And then she said the most amazing thing," Arthur said, picking up the ring and holding it in his palm. "She said, if the ring is the issue, we can go pick out a proper one together, we can fix this. As if it's a leaky faucet. As if my heart is just a piece of faulty plumbing that can be patched up with a bigger diamond." He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the first flicker of something other than devastation. It was a spark of bitter, clarifying anger. It was the beginning of the end of his sorrow. "Grandma," he said, his voice cracking, "was I a fool?" "No, dear," I said softly, my voice full of all the love I felt for him. You were in love, that's never foolish, it's brave. You offered her something real, you offered her a story. I leaned forward. Let me tell you something about that ring, Arthur, something I never told you. He looked at me, his attention finally captured. Your grandfather bought that ring when he was 24 years old. He was a history teacher at a public high school making next to nothing. He saved for a year. He told me he ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every single day. He sold his collection of rare books, the ones he adored, just to afford that simple, perfect stone. I could see Robert now as clear as day, his earnest young face full of hope. When he proposed to me, we weren't in a fancy restaurant. We were sitting on a park bench, sharing a bag of stale popcorn because it was all we could afford. There was no audience, there was no spectacle. There was just him, his voice trembling, telling me that he didn't have much to offer in the way of wealth, but he could offer me a lifetime of adventures, a house full of books, and a heart that would be mine and mine alone. And he handed me that ring. I reached out and gently touched his hand, the one holding the ring. I looked at that ring and I didn't see a small diamond, Arthur. I saw the peanut butter sandwiches. I saw the sold books. I saw the future he was promising me. That ring wasn't a status symbol. It was a sacrament. It held all of his sacrifices, all of his hopes. And for 60 years, it was my greatest treasure, not because of what it was made of, but because of the man who gave it to me. Tears were now silently streaming down Arthur's face. They weren't the tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of understanding, of grief for a love that was real and a love that was a mirage. She saw a cheap rock, he whispered. She saw an old piece of metal. Then she is the one who is poor, Arthur, not you, I said firmly. She is blind to the things that have real, lasting value, and you, my dear boy, deserve someone who can see. He stared at the ring in his hand, a new light dawning in his eyes. The hurt was still there, raw and deep, but it was now mingled with resolve. The spell was broken. He saw Jessica not as the goddess he had worshipped, but as the small, shallow person she truly was. What do I do with it now? He asked, looking at the ring with a mixture of love and pain. I can't keep it. It hurts to look at it, but I can't just throw it away. An idea, bold and audacious, began to form in my mind. It was a spark, just like the one I now saw in Arthur's eyes. No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. You don't throw it away, you don't hide it away. A legacy like that shouldn't be hidden, it should be transformed. He looked at me confused. What is the one thing you've always wanted, Arthur? The one dream you put on hold, the one thing you told yourself was impractical or frivolous? His eyes widened slightly. He knew immediately what I meant. The Mustang, he breathed, it was his childhood dream car. A 1967 Ford Mustang, cherry red, a symbol of freedom and adventure. It was a dream he'd shelved because Jessica had called it impractical, a midlife crisis car for a boy. Exactly, I said, my smile growing wider. That ring is not just a symbol of the past, of my love story with Robert. Right now, it can be a symbol of your future. It's a key. Let's find out what that key can unlock. I stood up and pulled back the curtains, letting the late afternoon sun stream into the room, chasing away the shadows. Tomorrow, I declared, we are not going to mourn, we are going to an appraiser. We're going to honor your grandfather's sacrifice by converting it into a new dream for his grandson. We are going to turn her insult into your anthem. For the first time in 48 hours, Arthur stood up. He walked over to the window and looked out at the world. And then he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. It was the first ray of sun after a long and devastating storm. The next morning felt like a declaration of war on sadness. Arthur was up before me, his bed made, his room tidy. The hollowed-out look was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined focus. He was wearing a crisp shirt and a jacket, as if preparing for an important business meeting. In a way, he was the business of reclaiming his life. The velvet box was on the kitchen table. He didn't touch it. He drank his coffee and looked at me over the rim of his mug. "Are you sure about this, Grandma?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Arthur," I replied, buttering a piece of toast. "Your grandfather was a practical man, but he was also a great romantic. He believed that the grandest gestures were the ones that made a person feel truly alive. Right now, this is what you need." My son Stephen was less convinced. When we told him our plan, he looked at us as if we'd both lost our minds. "You're going to sell Mom's ring?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. "Dad's ring to buy a car." "It's not just a car, Stephen," I said patiently. "It's a symbol, and the ring is no longer a symbol of a future marriage. It's become a symbol of a painful memory. We're not destroying the memory of your father. We are using his gift of love to heal his grandson." "But what will people think?" Stephen pressed, falling back on his usual concern. "It's a family heirloom." "I am the family," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And I have decided that this is the best use of this heirloom right now. Arthur's well-being is more important than a piece of metal and stone sitting in a box reminding him of his deepest humiliation. Do you understand?" Stephen, to his credit, saw the unshakable resolve in my eyes and finally relented. He was worried and confused, but he was not going to stand in our way. We found a reputable jeweler downtown, an old man with a magnifying loupe permanently attached to his eye and hands that were steady and sure. We sat in his quiet, plush office while he examined the ring. I felt a pang of nostalgia as he held it under the bright light, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of anticipation. This was not an ending, it was a metamorphosis. The jeweler, Mr. Abernathy, hummed and squinted. He tested the metal, measured the stone, and consulted a thick book filled with charts. Arthur sat beside me, silent and tense. After what felt like an hour, Mr. Abernathy looked up at us over his spectacles. "Well," he said slowly, "it's quite a lovely piece from its era. The platinum is of a very high quality." He paused, looking at the stone again. "The diamond is an old European cut. They don't make them like this anymore. It has a character that modern, laser-cut stones just lack." "We know it's not particularly large," Arthur said quietly. Mr. Abernathy chuckled. "Young man, in jewelry, size is not the only measure of worth. This stone, it is near flawless in its clarity and color. For its time, this would have been a remarkably expensive ring. Your grandfather, madam," he said, looking at me, "had impeccable taste and a generous heart." My own heart swelled with pride. "We know," I said softly. He scribbled some numbers on a pad of paper. "Given the quality of the stone, the platinum setting, and its vintage character, which is very much in demand right now, I could offer you a price that I think you will find quite surprising." He turned the pad around. Arthur and I both leaned forward. I gasped. Arthur's jaw dropped. The number written on the pad was nearly 4 times what I had ever imagined the ring could be worth in monetary terms. Robert, my humble schoolteacher husband, had somehow managed to buy a treasure far more valuable than even he probably knew. Is that correct?" Arthur stammered. "It is," Mr. Abernathy confirmed with a smile. "It's a special piece. It deserves a special price." In that moment, it felt like a final gift from Robert, a wink from beyond the grave. It was as if he was saying, "See, I always provided for you, and I'm still providing for our boy." We walked out of that jewelry store not with a check but with a wire transfer in process. The air outside seemed brighter, the city sounds more vibrant. Arthur looked dazed, as if he'd just stepped out of a dream. "Grandma," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "I don't know what to say." "Say you're ready to go car shopping," I said with a grin. The rest of the day was a blur of eggs. Illustrating purpose, we didn't go to a modern dealership. We went to a classic car specialist on the outskirts of town, a place that smelled of oil, leather, and history. And there it was, tucked in a corner, gleaming under the fluorescent lights as if waiting just for him. A 1967 Ford Mustang. It was perfect. Cherry red with a pristine white interior and a convertible top. Arthur walked around it, his hand hovering over the polished chrome, almost afraid to touch it. The owner, a grizzled man named Sal, saw the look in his eyes. "She's a beauty, isn't she? Fully restored engine, runs like a dream." "Can I?" Arthur asked, his voice full of reverence. "Go on, son, sit in it," Sal said, dangling the keys. Arthur slid into the driver's seat. His hands gripped the thin, elegant steering wheel. And for the first time, he didn't just smile, he beamed. It was a pure, unadulterated, joyful grin that reached every corner of his face. It was the smile of the boy who used to build model cars on my living room floor. He was home. We took it for a test drive. With the top down and the autumn wind in our hair, we flew down the country roads. The roar of the engine was a symphony of liberation. Arthur was laughing, a real deep belly laugh. He was no longer the heartbroken boy in the darkened room. He was alive. When we returned, the decision was already made. The money from the ring was more than enough for a substantial down payment, making the financing manageable. We signed the papers. Arthur Peterson, the proud new owner of a piece of American history, a rolling testament to his own resilience. The sting of Jessica's insult had been replaced by the roar of a V8 engine. The next day was a Tuesday. It was a crisp, brilliant autumn day, the kind where the sky is an impossibly deep blue and the air feels full of promise. We had a mission. It was unspoken, but we both knew what we had to do. It wasn't about revenge in a petty, vindictive sense. It was about closing a chapter. It was a final, definitive statement. I sat in the passenger seat of the Mustang, the white leather cool against my skin. Arthur adjusted his sunglasses, looking every bit the movie star in his dream car. He turned the key and the engine rumbled to life, a deep, satisfying growl that vibrated through the entire car. He put it in gear and we pulled out onto the street. We drove towards the downtown core, towards the glass and steel tower where Jessica worked. We knew she took her lunch break at precisely 12:30 p.m. and she always walked to the same trendy sandwich shop 2 blocks away. It was a part of her predictable, curated life. At 12:35 p.m. we saw her. She was walking with 2 of her colleagues, laughing at something one of them had said. She looked, as always, impeccable in a stylish trench coat, her hair perfect, her stride confident. Arthur slowed the car to a crawl. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He just drove past her, the cherry red paint of the car impossible to ignore. As we drew level with her, he reached over and gave the horn a single, gentle tap. Honk. It wasn't an angry sound. It was a cheerful, confident little greeting, a punctuation mark at the end of a long, painful sentence. Jessica's head whipped around. Her eyes, trained to spot status and style, immediately locked onto the car. They widened in appreciation, a flicker of admiration in their blue depths. Then her gaze shifted from the car to the driver. Her mouth fell open. The confident smile vanished from her face. She stopped dead in her tracks, her colleagues walking a few steps ahead before realizing she was no longer with them. Her expression was a priceless collage of shock, confusion, and something else, something that looked remarkably like regret. She saw Arthur, confident and smiling behind the wheel. Then she saw me in the passenger seat, offering a small, serene wave. We didn't stop, we didn't slow down. Arthur just gave a small nod, put his foot on the gas, and we drove on, the rumble of the Mustang the only reply to her stunned silence. In the rearview mirror, I could see her standing motionless on the sidewalk, a small, static figure quickly shrinking in the distance. The chapter was closed. The inevitable phone call came that evening. Arthur let it ring, then listened to the voicemail on speakerphone with me sitting beside him. Jessica's voice was completely different. The cool, dismissive tone was gone, replaced by a strained, almost frantic sweetness. "Art, it's me. I saw you today. That car, wow, is it new? It's incredible. Listen, I think we really need to talk. I think I've been unfair. I was just so shocked the other night. I wasn't myself. I miss you. Can we please just meet and talk this through?" Arthur listened to the entire message, his expression unreadable. When it was over, he deleted it without a second thought. A few minutes later, she sent a text, "I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I love you. Let's fix this." He looked at the text. He thought for a moment. Then he typed a reply, his fingers moving with calm certainty. I leaned over to read it. It said simply, "No, thank you." He blocked her number. He deleted her contact. He erased 5 years of a life that was not his own with 2 words and the press of a button. He looked at me and smiled, a real, peaceful smile. "Let's go for a drive, Grandma." We went out into the cool night air and lowered the convertible top. We drove out of the city under a canopy of stars that looked brighter and closer than ever before. We didn't talk much. We just listened to the hum of the engine and felt the wind on our faces. He was free. He had taken the most painful moment of his life and transformed it into a vehicle for his own liberation. He had learned the hardest and most important lesson of all, that self-worth is not something another person can give you, and it is certainly not something they can take away unless you let them. He had learned that sometimes the most valuable things in life are not the things we acquire, but the things we have the strength to let go of. My grandson found his own way back to himself, and he even found a new love, a wonderful young woman who fell for the kind, genuine man he is, not the car he drives. They go for picnics in the mountains, and she loves the jewelry box he made. As for me, watching him heal and rediscover his own value was the greatest triumph of all. It taught me that family heirlooms aren't just objects to be preserved in velvet boxes. Sometimes their true purpose is to be broken open, to be transformed, to fuel the dreams of the living. A legacy isn't about holding onto the past, it's about using the strength of the past to build a better future.